Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest on today's show is Susy Bastille. She's an expert on the Bridgewater Triangle, an area of about 200 square miles, or for those who are into the metric system, 520 kilometers in New England that has so long been a hotbed of paranormal activity. Susie has also researched and written about the legendary human-like creature known as pugwudgie, participated in a number of paranormal investigations, and has her own YouTube show and blog, which I'll give you information about later on in the interview. Susy Bastille, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Before asking you about specific occurrences of paranormal activity that has been reported in the Bridgewater Triangle, I would like to ask you, Susie, what area does it encompass and how did it get its name?
The area is in southeast Massachusetts, pretty much where the Cape meets the rest of the state. It got its name from Loren Coleman in the 70s. He was the first person to really draw attention to the phenomenon coming from here. And that is the name he came up with for it. And the name is one of the towns in the triangle is Bridgewater, Massachusetts. So that's where Bridgewater comes from.
What, Susie, is believed to be the root cause of the abundance of paranormal activity that has been experienced in the Bridgewater Triangle?
That is actually a topic for debate. The theory that's out there that is the kind of the common theory is that it's a Native American curse that was started because of King Philip's War, which was the bloodiest war per capita in the U.S. Absolutely horrible war. And I would not blame anyone for cursing the land. However, when you start to look into it, that place had things going on long before King Philip's War, before Europeans were ever here. One of the main areas in the Bridgewater Triangle is called Hockomock Swamp. And Hockomock means the place where the spirits dwell in Wampanoag. You generally don't name something the place where the spirits dwell if there aren't already spirits dwelling there. And there's also some accounts from colonists going back to the early 1600s as soon as people got here. And the Wampanoag tribe that is native to that area, they have stories going back hundreds of years before that. What caused it to be strange? I don't think we're really sure. You have like the Ohio River Valley where you have pockets of these strange things happening. The Bermuda Triangle, which doesn't seem to have much going on anymore. But I remember back when I was a kid, that was a hot spot and everyone was talking about that. I personally think that some land has just the right environment for these things to kind of manifest there, or these creatures like it there for some reason, or something's attracted to it, or it's easier for things to come through from wherever they're coming from. New England used to be pretty close to England. The Appalachian Mountains are actually the same mountain chain as the Scottish Highlands were. And if you look at Little People lore specifically, because every culture has lore around Little People. In England and Great Britain, there's the Fae. You have gnomes and elves and dwarves and the kobolds in Germany. But if you look specifically at that mountain range and that the edge of that tectonic plate, Little People lore around, you can almost map it out in a line. It is very similar, the same kind of behavior, descriptions. And that is, Little People lore is some of the oldest folklore in the world, and it's found all over the world. And it's very interesting. And there's other areas like that too, that always seem to follow the edge of a continent or a mountain range. You can almost draw a line when you're looking at these things. I think it's something natural that we just don't have the science to explain yet, personally.
Sightings of UFOs, or as many people now refer to them, UAPs, have been reported in the area. What, Susie, can you tell me about some of those sightings, such as what people who saw them said they looked like, if they saw any beings coming out of them, or if by chance they interacted with the crafts?
One of the most well-known sightings in the Bridgewater Triangle was two radio DJs, and they were near the Raynham dog track. They saw something, they described it as the shape of the home plate of a baseball field, and they had like pulled over and watched it, and it had some lights on it, and they were very adamant in what they saw. The actual first documented UFO sighting occurred close to the area in the 1600s. If you look up Pilgrim UFO sightings, it was Governor Winthrop that documented it. What most people see are just orbs of light and not necessarily a craft attached to it. But there have been a number of the cigar-shaped UFOs seen in that area, too. I've also heard the typical flying saucer type craft also. But most commonly, you see the orbs of light being reported that don't seem to have an actual craft attached to them, but they're described as UFOs because they're flying and they're unidentified.
Various types of humanoids, such as Bigfoot, ghosts, and shadow people, have been sighted in the area, as well as pugwudgies, the legendary human-like creatures who have been said can appear and disappear at will and shape shift. What can you tell me about these humanoids?
There's a couple of Bigfoot-type creatures seen in the area, especially around Lake Nippanicket, which they just call the Nip. You have the more typical Bigfoot, but you also have another creature that's more like a humanoid orangutan with like longer arms and orange fur or hair. That's interesting, and those have been sighted quite a bit in that area. The shadow, basically described as like a shadow giant seen in the Hockomock Swamp region. A lot of people believe that is Hobomok, who was the Wampanoag tribe's deity of death and disease, which they had a different viewpoint on things like that than we do. For them, death and disease was kind of a natural part of life. It wasn't like a bad or evil thing. It wasn't like an evil person to them at all. Europeans kind of made him vilified because it seems like a devil or a demon from the European perspective. Pugwudgies are actually reported to be seen with a shadow figure, and some people believe it's the same Hobomok shadow figures as well. And that's mostly occurring in the swamp itself, but also have been spotted in the Freetown State Forest, which is more towards the southern tip of the triangle. And of course, you have ghosts all over the place. Every place that I've mentioned and everywhere in between, there's different types of ghost stories. And of course, you have my favorite, the pugwudgies. For anyone, I don't think a lot of people know even the word. Even people around here don't. But they're said to be usually between 2 and 3 feet tall, but I have heard as tall as 4 feet. And the traditional description is they have smooth gray skin, and a lot of the times you hear them described as having a chipmunk-like face, but with long pointy ears. And they are known to have a great big pot belly. One of my favorite sightings, the woman said that she couldn't tell if it had pants on because its belly hung down so low. And the distinguishing feature between them and other little people is they are said to have porcupine-like quills on their head and their back. However, all of the eyewitness sightings that I have taken personally, and some of the more publicized ones, none of them have the quills. Every sighting I have taken, they have described them as having just dark hair all over. But they are said to be shapeshifters. It's kind of hard to tell if there are multiple little creatures or if they are shape-shifting. I think it might be easier to say it's shape-shifting than to admit we have all different kinds of strange creatures running around. It's not just one. But the pugwudgies here don't have the same description as pugwudgies in other areas. In Indiana and all around the Great Lakes region, there are pugwudgie stories, but Indiana specifically has a history around Mound State Park specifically. And the pugwudgies, they're about the same height, but they have a more bluish gray skin. They have blonde hair that they wear in a bowl cut, but they have the same pointy ears that stick out from the bowl cut. And they're known to wear clothing there, specifically blue clothing. It's usually described as a smock. So they're a little bit more stylish than the ones that we have over here.
You are also known as the Pugwudgie Whisperer, so I know you know a lot about it, and I try to get myself acquainted with it. And you were right when you say not that many people have heard about it, but happily, thanks to you, a lot of people are going to know about it. Now, you said something I'd like to ask you about, because when I'm reading about it a lot, the press has not really been too good. You say they've been wrongfully maligned. Why do you say that?
All across the world, little people lore is that they're tricksters. They just play harmless pranks, except in New England, and especially the Bridgewater Triangle, where they're known to be extremely dangerous. You're supposed to try to avoid them, and they're known to do things like lure people off of cliffs or lure people into the woods to never be seen again. When I first started researching them, this drove me crazy because all of the sightings, the pugwudgies more scared or surprised to see the person than they are. None of them are scary sightings. So I said, okay, where did this come from? Why do we think they're so horrible here? And it took me quite a while to start to put the pieces together. I'm lucky enough where I live in the area, so I can go drive to a historical society or a library, and I can talk to Wampanoag people too. And finally, what I found was it's a book from 1934 by Elizabeth Reynard. It's called The Narrow Land. And she basically collected folklore from Cape Cod. And she spoke to a man from the Wampanoag tribe named Red Shell. And he told this story about their creator, Maushop. He was a giant. And the story goes that the Pugwudgies and the Wampanoag people lived side by side. They got along until Maushop came along. And they got jealous of the attention the Wampanoag tribe was giving to Maushop. So they started acting up, kind of like little kids when they want attention. They'll be annoying, get the attention any way they can. The Wampanoag people finally got fed up with them being annoying. They went to Maushop's wife, because if you need something done, you go to the wife, because humans have always been the same. And she went to her husband and said, you got to do something about this. So what Maushop did in this story was remember, he's a giant. He went in the woods and he gathered up as many pugwudgies as he could grab, and he shook them up and he tossed them as far as he could. And some of the pugwudgies who survived made their way back, and they were angry at humans, and they started killing the Wampanoag people, and they killed Maushop's 5 sons. And he was so distraught that he killed himself. They said that's how they lost their creator. That's where the legend comes from, that the pugwudgies here are mad at humans. But Red Shell was using pugwudgies as an analogy for the Europeans. So the Wampanoag people were basically slaughtered by the Europeans when they came over. And in 1934, he wouldn't have been able to speak freely about that. So he took this creature from their lore and used that in the story. And that's where all of the bad names for pugwudgies in the area come from. And I also think people ran with that because people seem to want everything to be scary It's more interesting. Everyone wants to make things scary.
Giant birds with wingspans up to 12 feet have been reported in Hackomack Swamp and areas near it. How did the people who reported seeing these enormous flying creatures describe them? And what was the reaction? Were they frightened? Were they in awe of these creatures or what?
You actually have multiple big flying creatures that seem different to me. So you have things that are almost described as a pterodactyl. And you also have the typical thunderbird type sightings, which is literally just a huge bird. But then you also have this winged humanoid that there have been sightings of. One of the most famous sightings was a police officer, actually. He was on his way home towards the end of his shift. He was pulling down a dark road. He saw a person about 6 feet tall on the side of the road. He actually thought it was a hitchhiker. And when he pulled up closer, wings erupted from its back and it flew straight up, not flapping its wings, just straight up. He was so taken by it that he actually went back to the station and reported it and got a lot of ridicule for it. But then when he came out with this story, the people in that neighborhood basically said, oh, we see it all the time. So the people in that neighborhood, it's like a normal occurrence. I think seeing something strange is scary, but the people there that are used to it don't really seem too scared by it. It's kind of a part of life for them at this point. There's never stories of them causing any harm. It's a little shocking to see somebody fly straight up into the sky.
Horrific livestock mutilations have been found in the area. Some people attribute the mutilations to common predators. Others attribute them to satanic cults, while others say they were done by alien beings in UFOs. Has your research, Susy, come up with a consensus as to who or what is responsible for the mutilations?
There is physical evidence that there was an African lion in the area in the late 70s. There were actual footprints found. They had a zoologist come down from Boston and examine them. He said it was an African lion. There was a man that had worked at a Wild West show that had African lions that had actually seen it. And he said, beyond a shadow of a doubt, it was an African lion. No one fessed up to having an African lion that got loose. It was the 70s. The laws were a little bit different then, but there are not a lot of people in Massachusetts that have pet lions. How that lion got here, we do not know, but there was definitely an African lion loose in that area for a while. There was also a separate flap of livestock attacks where a different creature was spotted, and that's known as the Rehoboth lion. And then there's the Bridgewater bear. But these were also in the 70s. And so we only have black bears here. At that time, black bears were extinct in that area. They're now coming back. But at the time, there just weren't any. And there were people that said they saw it walking in a very human-like manner, not like a bear. So that one, I think, couldn't be a bear. Maybe one had wandered down, maybe not. That one's kind of up for debate. But there's been other strange sightings of animals that should never be in New England here as well. A kangaroo, an ocelot. And then in swamps specifically, there are sightings of enormous snakes. They're described as being about 25 feet long and as big around as a stovepipe. We don't have snakes that big here at all. Those sightings have happened. There's about 400 years worth of sightings. You could chalk some of it up to escaped exotic pets, but there's just too many of those types of things there. And to your point, there has been satanic cult activity in that area. There is actually some murders in the Freetown State Forest that were humans that were murdered in a satanic ritual sacrifice. And that was late 70s, early 80s around that time. And there's also been some other weird things found in the woods there. like bunkers that were built into the ground and have kids' toys, but then there's these weird symbols painted on the walls and they're camouflaged so you can't see them. Just the Freetown State Forest is the one part of the Bridgewater Triangle that I will say is scary. I'm not a sensitive at all. I haven't had a ton of paranormal experiences or anything, but the Freetown State Forest, I get a bad feeling there. And I've stayed overnight at the Lizzie Borden house. I've been to Eastern State Penitentiary, was fine. But I go to Freetown State Forest and I get very uncomfortable.
Ghosts and other paranormal phenomena have been reported at Bridgewater State University and the Taunton State Hospital, where, from what I've read, visitors have claimed to be touched and pulled by invisible forces. Could you, Susy, tell me about some of those supernatural happenings and perhaps the reasons for them?
It seems like almost every place in the triangle has ghosts of some type at all. Taunton especially. There's a lot of history in the area. One of my favorite ghost stories from Taunton is there is this little one-room schoolhouse. It's very old. It's been restored. And there was a woman who walked up to it. I think she like peeked in the window and she saw a class full of people basically inside. But then the place was closed. There was actually no one there when she went inside. So you have things like that. But then you have on Rock, which was a site during King Philip's War, where if you go on YouTube, you can find videos and videos and videos of people that have captured EVPs there. But one of the things that seems, it probably happens in other places, but it seems common in the Bridgewater Triangle and not in other places, is phantom fires. So you'll see a fire in the woods, but then when you get up to it, there's nothing there and no evidence of a fire at all. That is very common, both at Anawan Rock and Lake Nipponicket also. And then Freetown State Forest has a place called the Sonnet Ledge, where there is a woman in white type of ghost, but she's seen jumping off of the ledge. That particular place is known for people feeling compelled to jump all of a sudden. And that's something that's documented. There have been multiple deaths there, even in recent years. People just feel overwhelming sadness and feel compelled to jump. Again, the Freetown State Forest, this is the scary and heavy part for me. The other ghost stories, you have a hitchhiker ghost in Rehoboth, the redheaded hitchhiker. It's the typical hitchhiker ghost. He used to appear hitchhiking and you'd pick him up. People don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Now the story is he just appears in your vehicle while you're driving and he won't say a word and then he'll just laugh maniacally and disappear. You have some of the more traditional ghost stories. That's a little bit of a spin on the traditional hitchhiker ghosts. And then there is a tower in Taunton that people are said to feel compelled to jump. And there's also a lot of ghosts there. And there are stories of people reporting they felt like a ghost was trying to pull them under the water. And there's another weird thing about that lake is the town actually closed off the beach there. There used to be a really nice beach that was popular for swimming, and the town one summer came and just closed off the beach. And the reason that they gave was there were so many drownings there. I can't find any records of these drownings, and all the local people said that there was one drowning, I think it was back in the 80s, but aside from that, no one knows. And this was, I think it was like 2013, they closed the beach down. So that's kind of a weird thing that the town got involved and just for some reason closed this beach down, and no one seems to know why.
According to some sources, the paranormal activity, specifically the nasty ones in the Bridgewater Triangle, is a result of Native American curses placed on the area. And you addressed that earlier because I was curious to know the backstory to it. So I thank you. I was very curious about that. What I want to know is there any way those curses can be removed? Because a lot of times you hear about curses. Well, if this and this is done, the curse gets removed. Have you heard about anything like that? How the curse could be removed?
The curse is actually from a specific event. It was at One Rock, which I was just there a few weeks ago. It was where the last incident in King Philip's War, and Chief Anawan was captured there by a man named Benjamin Church and his people. Church said, if you surrender peacefully, your life will be spared. Just come to Plymouth with us. So Anawan did, and he also gave them the tribe's wampum belt, which was a sacred piece to them. When they brought Anawan to Plymouth, Benjamin Church had to leave, and the officials in Plymouth decided they were going to execute Anawan anyway. They actually beheaded him, put his head on a pike, gruesome, monstrous stuff. And the legend is that it was the wampum belt being taken that started the curse. And if the wampum belt is returned, then the curse would be lifted. But no one has ever found the wampum belt.
Susy, I've participated in many paranormal investigations. This includes the notorious Lizzie Borden house, where in 1892, her father and stepmother were both murdered. Could you tell me about your investigation at the Lizzie Borden house and perhaps about one or two other paranormal investigations you covered?
I stayed the night at the Lizzie Borden house a couple times. My son stayed with me one time. My son had experiences there. I did not. I seem to be paranormal repellent. I do not attract ghosts. But a lot of the people that stay there do have experiences. And especially if you talk about taking Andrew Borden's money, like there's a little change jar. If you take a penny out of it, that's supposed to stir up some activity. And the Lizzie Borden house is in Fall River, which is the next town over from Freetown. So it is on the edge of the Freetown State Forest, the place I keep saying I don't like. And not a lot of people know this, but there was other murders on that property before that murder happened. So Lizzie that lived next door, she tried to kill two of her children in the well in the basement, and then she killed herself. You could say there's mental illness in the family, or you could say, there's some kind of bad energy in that area from all of that stuff. I tend to think it's both. She seemed to be going through like postpartum depression. But if you have that going on and then you're in this area that's oppressive and negative, that's not going to help you.
Is there any other one that you got involved with that really got to you and say, wow, this is like incredible?
I did spend the night in the swamp on Christmas Eve. I can't point to seeing or hearing one thing specifically, but it is creepy. I would not recommend doing it in December. If you're going to do it in the summer. And don't do it in Freetown State Forest, because I would be worried about people. But Hockomock Swamp might be a better place to go camping if you want to see some activity. I've also just linked up with a paranormal investigation group. I'm trying to get out more. And the way I look at it is the more weird stuff you're around, the more weird stuff will start happening to you, or the more you talk about weird stuff. So I'm trying my best to not be paranormal repellent anymore. Wish me luck with that part.
I wish you luck. And I will say this openly, gut feeling, you will. Another book is going to come out of this for sure. But you're a curious person, and that's great, because you will go about an investigation like a detective would, not necessarily seeing things as they are, but going beneath. So that's a good trait you have.
A couple of weeks ago when I was at Anawan Rock, I brought my EMF detector and a pendulum, but I also brought my grandfather's dowsing rods with me. He used them to find water, but I have them now. People use them for dowsing. I did some experiments there. I did not get anything, but the dowsing rods were going towards the water. It's a swamp, so there was water on three sides, but this one particular spot in the water, I don't know if that is my grandfather used them to find water, they wanted to do that, or if there was something in that direction that it was trying to point me towards. But I want to go out there and do more with the dowsing rods for sure. I think I just need to get a little bit of practice.
More and more people are using dowsing rods for identifying spirits or paranormal activity in an area. And it has good vibes in it from your grandfather. I think that's a good one you should stay with. As stated at the beginning of the interview, Susy, you have your own YouTube show and blog. Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to watch your show, read your blogs, how can they do that?
On YouTube, the Pugwudgie Whisperer. If you search my name, you can find other projects I've done. And my blog is pugwudgies.blogspot.com. And that's also got some links to some videos.
Susy Bastille, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Yakking with you has been a most informative experience. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Had a great time.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.